Guys, please confirm to me. All of you get my voice on screen. Those are attending in online. Is my voice is clear to all of you guys? Please confirm to me. All of you get my voice on screen. Those are attending in online. Guys, please confirm to me. All of you get my voice on screen. Come this side. Come this side. Let me see. Guys, please confirm to me. All of you get my voice on screen. Those are attending in online. But all right. Good morning, guys. And check it. What we understand the content there in the last session. Right, sir. In JDBC architecture, what we completed so far, if you observe the points there, in a JDBC, if you want to prepare any application, we need to follow some steps. What are the various steps here we have to follow there? First one is load and register the driver. Second one is establish the connection between Java application and database. Third one is create either statement or prepared statement or callable statement. And last one is what there, write and execute SQL queries. And lastly, like what there, close the resources. Option we completed load and register the driver, establish the connection between Java application and database. And the third one is what there, create either statement or prepare statement or callable statement. The points we understood. Yesterday I given the information about what is the difference between statement, prepared statement and a callable statement. One example I given there in the last session. Right. If you observe the difference between statement, prepared statement and callable statement there, when we want to execute all the SQL queries independently, when we want to execute all the SQL queries independently, there we have to use what statement. If we want to execute the same SQL query in the next sequence, where to improve the performance of the JDBC applications, there we have to go for what their prepared statement. If you want to execute stored procedures and functions which are available at database from Java application, there we have to use what callable statement. Then in the basic JDBC applications, we have to use statement only. But to create statement object, we have to use a public statement create statement method for connection that we have to use there. Example also we have given there. Statement st is equal to conduct create statement method. Automatically we are able to get what object there? Statement object. Then immediately we have a question. What is that question there? In a JDBC, statement is an interface. Not possible to create objects, but how it is possible for create statement method to create object for statement interface. All right, sir. If you observe this point, answer is very clear. Understand this now. Answer is very clear. Try to observe this clearly. JDBC is an abstraction provided by Sun Microsystems, and its implementation class are provided by all the database vendors. As part of that, Java.SQL.statement is an interface provided by Sun Microsystems as part of JDBC abstraction, and its implementation class are provided by all the database vendors as part of the JDBC abstraction implementation. All right. In JDBC applications, create statement method will not create object for the statement interface. It will create an object for the implementation class of the statement interface, and that implementation class object reference value is written from what their create statement method. That is the topic already we understood. Then after that, after completion of this, the next one is like what there write and execute SQL queries. In JDBC applications, to write and execute SQL queries, we have to use the following methods. What are the various methods here we have used there? Execute query method, execute update method, then what next one? No, execute method. Everybody understand this? Please close the door. Just wait. One more person will come. Okay, execute query, execute update, and execute method. The other three methods are existed. That's okay, fine. Now understand this. Here we have an important interview question. What is this question here? What is the difference between execute query method, execute update method, then what next one here? Execute method. Okay. Execute query, execute update, and execute method. They are the three methods which are available here. All of you understand this? Observe carefully. Now, first of all, tell me, before this question, I want to ask one question to you. Now, try to answer for it. I think you are all aware about Oracle database, at least one database, not exactly Oracle database, some database. You're all aware about this database, no, right? I want to give some, I want to ask some questions to you, now try to answer for it. Tell me, how many types of SQL queries are available? How many types of SQL queries are available? Majorly, two types of SQL queries here we can understand. What are the two types here now? DDL SQL queries. Second one is DML SQL queries. Am I right? Two types of SQL queries here we can understand, DDL and DML. Am I right or not? Under this DDL, what queries are available there? Create a table, alter table, and what next one here? No, and what next one here? And a drop table. But DML SQL queries are what there? Just first of all, I'm talking about your awareness. What do you know? The point I'm talking with, you know. What about this DML SQL queries? No, insert, update, and delete. Am I right or not? Okay. But actually, I don't require this comparison. In my entire JDBC, I don't require this type of classification. This is in general classification in Oracle that I know. But what I require the classification here, I don't require this type of classification. Say for your awareness purpose, I've written this, but I don't require that actually. But what I require here, first one is selection group, and the second one is what there, non-selection group. Selection group and non-selection group, that I required. This comparison I required. As per my JDBs, I required this type of division. Under this selection group SQL query is only select SQL query. Under this non-selection group, what SQL queries are available? We can understand create. Next one is Walter, alter. Next one is what there? Drop, insert, update. Then what next one here? Delete. These many things are existed here. So under the selection group, only select SQL query. Under non-selection groups, all the remaining SQL queries are available. I need this comparison. Is it all of you getting my point or not? Okay. Then after that, after understanding this particular point, now come to the point here. In JDBC, in JDBC applications, all of you listen carefully. In JDBC application, execute query method. What is this method? No, execute query method can be used to execute only selection group SQL queries. like select SQL query. Selection group SQL queries like what there? Select SQL query in order to fetch the data from database. For what purpose we are executing select SQL query? In general, for what purpose we are using select SQL query? For fetching the data from database or not? For the sake of fetching the data from database or not? Right, to fetch the data from database only, we are using what SQL query? No, select SQL query. Everybody understand these points clearly. What is the purpose of the select SQL query? For fetching the data from database. To execute this select SQL query, we have to use what method here? No, execute query method. So one point is very much clear. What point is very much clear there? Now tell me what point is very much clear here. To execute select SQL query or to fetch data from database table, we have to use what there? Execute query method. Then what is the prototype of this execute query method here? Public result set. What is the return type here? No, result set. Result set. Then after that, execute query of string query. Select SQL query only. We have tried throws SQL exception. Understand clearly? Public result set, execute query. Then after that, what we have tried there? String query throws SQL exception. This is what we are having there. Okay, fine. Example I'm telling to you, now try to understand it. Result set rs is equal to st dot execute query of select star from emp1. This is what we are having. To write and execute SQL queries, how many methods are available? 3 methods are available. What are the 3 methods now? Execute query, execute update, and execute method. What is the purpose of execute query? To execute select SQL query in order to fetch the data from database table. What is the method prototype? The complete method prototype is what there? Public result set execute query of string query throws SQL exception. Then example I've given. What is that example here? Result set rs is equal to st dot execute query of select star from emp1. Sir, all of you are getting clarity or not? All right. Now what happened internally? When I execute the select SQL query, then what happened internally? Now let me check this. Already we prepared some of the diagram here. Now try to understand it clearly. Now here I want to write all the 3 methods here. One is execute query method, 4th step anyway. Second one is execute update method. Third one is execute method. Actually, all these things are come under like what their 4th step. Write and execute SQL queries. Now let me write our content here. All of you observe carefully. Result set rs is equal to st dot execute query of select star from emp1. This instruction here we have written. We have written this instruction inside the Java application only, JDBC program only. This is the code inside the JDBC program. Right, all of you observe carefully. When JVM execute this particular instruction, JVM will take the provided SQL query. That is what they select star from emp1. Then immediately JVM will send that SQL query to whom their JDBC driver. JVM will send that SQL query to whom their JDBC driver. Now what JDBC driver will do there? JDBC driver will send that SQL query to whom there? To the connection. JDBC driver will send that select SQL query to whom their connection. Connection will carry that select SQL query to whom there to the database engine. Connection will carry that SQL query to whom there database engine. Okay. Then what database engine is able to do now? Now database engine is able to follow four operations. We know already that four operations there. What are the four operations now? Query tokenization, query parsing, query optimization, and query execution. Query tokenization, query parsing, query optimization, and query execution. Then by performing all these things, it able to fetch the data from database table. Database engine is able to fetch the data from database table. Already table is available where inside the table some data is existed. Assume in that data is available there in the database table. Then database engine will fetch the data from database table. Database engine will fetch the data from database table. When it fetch the data from database table, what the data will be, what database engine will do there? Database engine will send that data back to what their connection. Database engine will fetch the data back to like what their connection. Connection will carry the data back to whom their JDBC driver. The data will be sent back to the JDBC driver. Now JDBC driver will send the data back to whom there? Back to the Java application. Database engine will send the data back to what their Java application. Means that at the Java application, the total data will be stored in the form of an object. Whatever the data which is retrieved from database table, the total data will be given back to the, will be sent back to the Java application. At Java application, the total data will be stored in the form of an object. That object is called as what their result set object. Result set of results from database. Get my point or not? Now here we are getting what object here? No, result set object here we are getting. Observe carefully, all of you, what exactly the point I'm telling you. First of all, when we execute that result set rs is equal to st.execute query, select a star from emp1. JVM will take the provided SQL query. JVM will send that provided SQL query to JDBC driver. JDBC driver will send that SQL query to connection. Connection will carry that SQL query to database engine. Database engine will execute that SQL query by following query tokenization, query parsing, query optimization, and query execution. By this, database engine is able to fetch the data from database table. That fetch data will be given back to the connection. Connection will carry that fetch data to what there? JDBC driver. JDBC driver will send that fetch data to the Java application. At Java application, that fetch data will be stored in the form of an object. That object is called as what there? A result set object. In the result set object, that fetch data is available. Result set object is available at Java program. In the sense, we can read the data from result set object by using some mechanism. That mechanism I will discuss with you later on. How to read data from result set object, I will discuss with you later on. No need to think much about it. Yes, sir. All of you get my point or not? All right, sir. Now this is the way of executing what there? Execute query method. All right, sir. Whatever the result set object is created at Java program, that result set object is returned by execute query method that we are getting in the form of rs variable. Get my point or not? Whatever the result set object is created Java program, that result set object reference value is written by execute query method. That reference value will be stored in rs reference variable. That's it. Now this is the internal story of what their execute query method. All right, so now let me have some document here about this particular point. Some few points here I want to add there. Now try to understand it clearly. When we execute the above instruction, JVM will perform the following actions. What are the various points which are performed by JVM there? First of all, JVM will take the provided SQL query from execute query method Okay, JVM will send that a select SQL query to database engine. Directly I'm writing there to database engine through JDBC driver and a connection. Directly I'm telling that point here. Understand it now. In the diagram I shown each and every step clearly. JDBC driver to connection, connection to database like this. No? But in the document I'm writing directly. So JVM will send that select SQL query to database engine through JDBC driver and connection. All right. At a database engine will execute that select SQL query by following query tokenization, query parsing, query optimization, and query execution. Then what next one here? By executing the select SQL query, database engine will fetch the data from database. Database engine will send data to Java application through the same connection and JDBC driver. Observe carefully. Database engine will send data to Java application through the same connection and JDBC driver. Then what is the next point here? Now tell me. What is the next point here? Now tell me. Next point is at Java application, the fetched data will be stored. The fetched data will be stored in the form of an object called result set object. In the form of an object called as what there? Result set object. Not completed. Creating result set object is okay, but not completed. One more point is remaining. What is that point here? No. All right. At Java application, execute query method will return the generated. Execute query method will return the generated what the result set object reference value. Result set object reference value. Observe carefully, guys. Then what is the point I'm telling there? All right, sir. At Java application, the execute query method will return the generated result set object reference value. That's it now. This is the point here we have to understand clearly. Has I got my point or not? Right, so now this is what exactly the meaning of like what there execute query method. The total internal flow here we are discussing there clearly now. This is completed. Finally, only one point. Execute query method is to execute select SQL queries in order to fetch the data from database table. Got it or not? Internal story also here we understood that. Please remember this. Don't stop your answer with only creating result set object. That one more point. Next point also here we have to say. Why? Because on the basis of this point, I will have one example and next classes now. Next few classes now. Execute query method will return the generated reference value. Generated result set object reference value. It's mandatory. To specify this point is mandatory. On the basis of this also we have a point in the future. Remember this. That's okay. This is completed. Next one is another thing is like what there execute update method. Execute update method. Listen carefully now. Guys, I'm asking one more question to you now. Tell me how many types of SQL queries are available? Two types. Not on the basis of DML or DDL. Leave it. I require the classification on the basis of what there select and non-select. Select SQL queries, non-select SQL queries. Under select SQL queries, only one SQL query, that is select. Under non-select SQL queries, no, 6 or 7 are available. What are the 6 or 7? No. First one is what there? create a table, alter table, drop table, insert, update, delete. 6 number of SQL queries are available here. Good. Now, in JDBC applications, execute update method can be used to execute non-select SQL queries like non-select SQL queries like create, alter, drop, create, alter, drop, insert, update, delete in order to perform manipulations in a database table. Observe carefully. Select SQL queries for the sake of what they're fetching the data, not for manipulating the data. Am I right or not? Select SQL queries for what purpose there? No, getting the data, not for manipulating the data. But non-select SQL queries can be used to manipulate the data, doing some operation with the data, not fetching the data, performing some operations with the data. Maybe creating table, alter table, drop table, insert record, update record, or maybe delete the records. All these are related to what they're somewhat manipulations only, some data manipulations only we are performing there. But select SQL queries for what purpose they're fetching the data. Right, sir. For executing these SQL queries, no, we have to use execute update method. Let's see this, that method prototype here I want to write. Public int execute update string query throws SQL exception. Example here I'm telling to you. Public int execute update string query throws SQL exception. All of you observe carefully. Example I'm telling to you, int row count is equal to st dot execute update. Say for example, assume it, I have a table in my database now. EMP1 table is already existed in my database. Assume it. EMP1 table is existed in my database. For example, execute update where update EMP1 set ECell is equal to ECell plus 500 where ECell less than 10,000. This is an SQL query here we have written. I want to give some 10,000. I want to give 500 as a bonus for all the employees. Those are having their salaries less than 10,000. Right, sir. Intro count is equal to execute update of update EMP1 set ECell is equal to ECell plus 500 where ECell less than 10,000. ECell less than what there 10,000. This is a point, sir. Then what happened when we execute this? Then what is going to be happen here now? All of you observe carefully. Let me write the same in a section here. And the row count is equal to st dot execute update of update EMP1 set ECell is equal to ECell plus 500 where ECell less than 10,000. This is a query here we have written. When JVM execute this particular instruction, JVM will take the provided SQL query. Then after that, JVM will send the provided SQL query to JDBC driver. Now JDBC driver will send that update SQL query to connection. Now here connection will carry that provided SQL query to database engine. Now database engine will perform the required updations in database table. It able to perform manipulations in the database table. Then whenever it is performing manipulations in the database table, If the query is insert SQL query, one record is manipulated. If the query is update SQL query, for example, 10 records are updated. If the query is delete SQL query, for example, 10 records are deleted. So it will identify how many number of records are affected with our SQL query. How many number of records are affected with our SQL query. It will identify that. Then after that, it able to identify that number of records which are affected. It able to identify the number of records which are affected. The number of records which are affected is called as a row count value. The number of records which are affected with our SQL query is called as what their row count value. Now, row count value is identified in the database table. That row count value will be given to the connection. Database engine will fetch the row count value. That row count value will be given to the connection. When row count value is given to the connection, connection will send that row count value to what there? To the JDBC driver. Row count value will be given to the JDBC driver. Now, JDBC driver is able to send that row count value to what application there now? To the Java application. Now we can observe this clearly that row count value is coming there from database. I want to write like what there? Row count value. Integer value, maybe 10 or 20 or maybe 5 or 1, whatever it may be. How many number of records are affected with our non-select SQL query? That number, that row count value, we are getting into the Java application. Whatever the row count value is generated here, that row count value is written by execute update method. That's why I've taken the return value of this execute update method is what there into row count. Row count is what there, whatever the integer value we are getting from database engine, that is nothing but number of records which are affected in the database. No, that value is called as what there, row count value. That row count value is written by what method? Execute update method. Yes, all of you are getting clarity on this. So finally here we are getting what value here? No, row count value here we are getting. That row count value will be stored in what there? Row count variable. Tell me guys, up to now, two methods I completed. One is what there? Execute query. Another one is what there? Execute update. What is the purpose of execute query method? To execute, select SQL query in order to fetch the data from database table. What is the purpose of execute update method? What is the purpose of execute update method? To execute non-select SQL query in order to perform the database operations like create, alter, drop, insert, update, delete. Right? Then in order to perform these many database manipulations, for the sake of that we are using what there? Non-select SQL queries. To execute this non-select SQL queries, we are using what there? Execute update method. Finally, row count value is coming to the Java application. That row count value is taken by whom there? Execute update method. That value will return that row count value clearly. Right, sir. Now let's see some implementation here, some steps here I want to specify, try to understand it clearly. All right, sir. All of you observe this. That steps are almost the same as that. These steps are not. Right, sir. Now I want to copy and paste this total data, but we have to give the modifications. Yes, sir. All of you ready to give modifications? No. At least in this way also we can remember the content here. Try to identify. Try to put your mind here where we have to do these manipulations. No. Right, sir. Now here, including this one. Right, sir. Now this data here I want to copy and paste, but we have to check the modifications, guys. Of course, I need to change the numbers here. One minute. Okay, no problem. Just let me complete this one time. Right, sir. Let me check it. If any changes are available, I'll do that on fly. All right, sir. Now tell me, what is the first step here? Now tell me, JVM will take the provided SQL query from what method now? Come on, we have to, everybody has to give response there. Then only you can understand it now. All right, sir. Now I want to specify clearly, JVM will take the provided non-select SQL query from execute update method. Nice. JVM will send that non-select SQL query to database engine through JDBC driver and connection. At a database engine will execute that what next one? Non-select SQL query by following query tokenization, query parsing, query optimization, and query execution. By executing what there? Non-select SQL query, database engine will perform will perform some manipulations on the number of records in the database. Right, sir. By executing the non-select SQL query, database engine will do some manipulations on the number of records in the database table. That's enough. In the database table. Database engine will send data. Okay, fine. Now here what point here we have to identify there? Database engine will identify the number of records which are affected with the provided non-select SQL query and database engine will send the generated row count value to Java application through the same JDBs, through the same connection and JDBC driver. Observe carefully. Database engine will identify the number of records which are affected with the provided non-select SQL query. Here I want to say like what there? Row count. With the provided non-select SQL query, and database engine will send the generated row count value to Java application through the same connection and JDBC driver. Got clarity up to this point now? Then what next one here? What change is required here? In the Java application, the row count value in the Java application, the row count value will be stored in the form of an integer value. It will be stored in the form of an integer value. That's okay. In Java application, that execute update method will return the generated row count value. Generated what there? Row count value. That's it. Yes, sir. All the points are clear or not? Now let us see once again here. Now try to understand this. What exactly the point I'm telling to you? JVM will take the provided non-select SQL query from execute update method. JVM will send that non-select SQL query to database engine through JDBC driver and connection. At a database engine will execute that non-select SQL query by following query tokenization, query parsing, query optimization, and query execution. By executing the non-select SQL query, database engine will do some manipulations on the number of records in the database table. Database engine will identify the number of records which are affected, that is row count, with the provided SQL query, and database engine will send the generated row count value to Java application through the same connection and JDBC driver. In Java applications, the row count value will be stored in the form of what there? An integer value. In Java application, the execute update method will return the generated row count value. That's it. All the points are clear or not? So two methods here we completed. All right, sir. Now observe carefully. What is the next one here? Three methods are available to write and execute SQL queries in JDBC. What are the three methods now? Execute query, execute update, then what next one now? Execute method. Execute query method is for the sake of executing select SQL query to fetch the data from database table. Execute update method is for the sake of executing non-select SQL queries to perform the database operations like create, alter, drop, insert, delete, update. Okay, all the database operations are completed with execute query and execute update. All the things are completed with what there execute query and execute update. But what is the purpose of this execute method? Still, what is the need of this execute method? All right, sir. If you observe this point here, I'm giving clarity there. Now try to understand it clearly. In JDBC applications, execute method can be used to execute both the types of SQL queries. Guys, observe carefully. One question here I'm telling to you. In JDBC applications, the execute method can be used to execute both the types of SQL queries. Listen carefully. At the time of preparing my JDBC program, if I know the type of SQL query, that is select SQL query, I can use directly execute query method. At the time of preparing JDBC application, if I know my SQL query is a non-select SQL query, like alter or maybe create or maybe delete or maybe update or maybe insert, whatever it may be, I can use directly execute update method. But at the time of writing my program, I don't know which SQL query I'm going to execute. At runtime of my application, I will ask to the user enter SQL query. That user entered SQL query, I have to execute. But at the time of writing my JDBC program, I don't know which SQL query I'm going to execute in my application. That SQL query will be generated at runtime, not at the time of writing the program. It may be decided at runtime. I will ask the user enter SQL query. User may enter SQL query. That SQL query I have to execute. Yes, sir, got my point or not? Or else I don't want to have any confusion. Any type of SQL query we can provide, that doesn't matter. I want to execute my query without thinking about the type of SQL query. I want to execute my SQL query. In that situation, we have to go for what method there? No, execute method. Let the SQL query may be anything. Let the user to provide any type of SQL query to us in my JDBC program. That doesn't matter. Finally, I want to execute that query. I want to get some results. Without thinking about the query, if you want to execute the SQL queries, there we have to go for what method? Execute method. Maybe SQL queries are coming at a dynamic. At runtime of my program, SQL queries are coming. To execute that SQL queries at runtime, to execute SQL queries, executing SQL queries by getting query at runtime, there we have to go for what method here? No, execute method. Then what is the purpose of, what is the capability of this execute method? What is the capability of the execute method? Execute method can be used to execute both the types of SQL queries. Both the types of SQL queries. Got my point or not? All right, sir. Now let's see this one. What is the prototype of this particular one? Public Boolean execute of string query. Any type of query here we can use. Throws SQL exception. Public Boolean execute string query throws SQL exception. Observe carefully. Boolean B1 is equal to st dot execute of select star from emp1. Observe carefully. Another example. Boolean B2 is equal to st dot execute of update SQL query. Update emp1. Set ECL is equal to ECL plus 500, where ECL less than 10,000. Okay, understand this point here. In JDBC applications, that execute method can be used to execute both the types of SQL query. Then continuation I'm telling there, observe carefully. If we execute select SQL query with execute method, then execute method will return true value. Okay, execute method can execute any type of SQL query. But what is the identification for us which SQL query that execute method is executing now? What is the identification for us that execute method is executing which SQL query? When it executes select SQL query, then what is the identification for us? It is executing select SQL query. When it executes non-select SQL query, then what is the identification for us? Whether it is executing non-select SQL query or not? That is depending on the return type of the return value of the execute method. If execute method returns true value, means that it has been executed select SQL query. If execute method returns a false value, it's the meaning of Execute method is executing non-select SQL query. That's why I'm giving there. If we execute select SQL query with execute method, then execute method will return true value. Similarly, if we execute non-select SQL query with the execute method, then execute method will return false value. There is an identification for us what SQL query that execute method is executing. Now I'm telling to you clearly, observe carefully. Now inside this, if we provide system.out.println of B1, come on guys, what value here we are able to get now? We executed what SQL query? Select SQL query. By the execution of select SQL query, what output here we are able to get in JDBC program? True value. Definitely, execute method has to return what value there? True value. Now the output is like what there? True value. Next one is in this example. In this example, if I provide like what there? System.out.println of like B2, if we provide there, and then what output here we are able to get there? Now tell me. All right, sir. What is that output here? We are able to get no false value. Why we are getting false value here? We have executed what there? Non-select SQL query. Understand my point here? No. Then one more note I am telling there. By that we are able to get much clarity. In the future also I am able to show this program as is that note related program. Right, sir. In general, in JDBC applications, if we know the SQL query in general in JDBC applications, if you know the SQL query, if you know the type of SQL query, then we are able to use, if you know the type of SQL query at the time of writing program, then we are able to use either execute query method or execute update method. Execute query method or execute update method. Execute update method depending on the type of SQL query. Okay, but the point is like what there? Type of SQL query. But the point is what there? If we don't know the type of SQL query, at the time of writing JDBC program, JDBC application, then we have to use what their execute method. That means if we don't know the type of SQL query at the time of writing JDBC program, JDBC application, then we have to use what their execute method. Why? Because execute method has the capability of executing both the SQL queries. Execute query method is able to execute only select SQL query. Execute update method is able to execute only non-select SQL query. But here execute method is able to execute what there? Both the types of SQL queries. All right, sir. Now this is what exactly the point I'm telling to you. There's no type of point here I'm telling to you. Example here we are given there. But observe carefully the flow, internal flow here, whatever the point I'm telling to you. Observe carefully. First of all, here I am telling to you clearly. Boolean B1 is equal to st dot execute of select a star from emp1. System.out.println of B1. Here the output is like what there? True value here we are getting. What's going to be happen there now? Tell me no. Just try to follow red color lines. Try to follow red color lines. Now understand it clearly. First, JVM will take the provided select SQL query. JVM will send that select SQL query to JDBC driver. JDBC driver will send that select SQL query to connection. Connection will carry that select SQL query to database engine. Database engine will perform what their query tokenization, parsing, optimization, and execution. Executing that query, fetching the data from database server. That fetched data will be given to the connection. Connection will carry that fetch data to JDBC driver. JDBC driver will send that fetch data to what their Java application. At Java application, the total fetch data will be stored in the form of what their result set. Now result set object is created, but please remember this. Result set object is created even in the case of execute method with select SQL query. Result set object is created, but execute method will not return this generated result set object reference. Execute method will not return the generated result set object reference. Here, execute method will return true value. Here, execute method will return what their true value. Got it or not? So here we are able to get what value here? No, true value here we are getting. All right, so then after that, after completion of this, then what next one here? Boolean b2 is equal to st dot execute of update emp1 set ecell is equal to ecell plus 500 where ecell less than 10,000. This is a query here we have provided there. Now try to follow this blue color lines. What happened there when JVM execute this particular instruction? JVM will take the provided non-select SQL query. JVM will send that non-select SQL query to JDBC driver. JDBC driver will send that non-select SQL query to the connection. Now connection will carry that non-select SQL query to database engine. Now database engine will execute the non-select SQL query, identify the number of records which are affected, that is row count value, send that row count value back to the connection. Connection will carry that row count value to JDBC driver. JDBC driver will send the row count value to Java application. Finally, row count value is available at which location there? Java application. Even though row count value is available at Java application, but my execute method will return false value, not returning row count value. If it is execute update method, in place of this execute method, if you use execute update method, what happened there? It will not return the Boolean value. It will return the generated row count value. But if it is execute method, what it is returning now? In place of returning integer value, directly it is returning what value here? False value, Boolean value. That is the functionality of what their execute update method, and execute query method. In the case of execute query method, result set object is generated, result set object reference is written. But in the case of execute method with the select SQL query, result set object is created even though execute method will return true value, Boolean value. In the case of execute update method, integer value is generated, that integer value is written by execute update method. In the case of execute method, even though integer value is created, but execute method will not return that integer value. Execute method will return the generated, that means Boolean value, false value it able to return from the execute method. So this is that overall scenario here we have to understand clearly. Right, sir. Now I want to simplify this part here and try to understand it. No, in the document I want to write the point here. Now try to observe carefully. Right, sir. Here itself I want to write the information here. Try to observe carefully. In JDBC applications, if we execute select SQL query with execute method, then JVM will send select SQL query to database engine, where database engine will fetch the data from database table and sends that data to Java application in the form of result set, but execute method. Somewhat direct information I have written there. Not each and every point here, not required to 7 or 6 number of steps now. Direct information I have given there, but execute method will return true value. That is completed. Observe carefully. In JDBC applications, if we execute select SQL query with execute method, then JVM will send a select SQL query to database engine, where database engine will fetch the data from database table and sends the data to Java application in the form of result set. But execute method will return what value? True value. Same pair I want to write in the form of like what there? Non-select SQL query. Now tell me what I have to write there. In JDBC application, if we execute, come on guys, now tell me non-select SQL query with execute method, then JVM will send a non-select SQL query to database engine, where database engine instead of fetching the data will perform manipulations on the data, will perform manipulations on the data, manipulations on the data, manipulations on the data, okay, manipulations on the data, comma, identify the row count value, identify the row count. Already we are aware about this row count value. That's why I'm writing directly the point here. Identify the row count value and sends that row count value to Java application in the form of what value there? Come on, in the form of what there? Integer value. In the form of integer value. But execute method will return what value? Execute method will return what value? False value. That's it, guys. Now this is the total awareness on like what there? Execute query, execute update, and finally what there? Execute method. Got it or not? Right. So then after that, after completion of this, right here, I given that information about like what there execute method where we are going to use that execute method. But later on we'll see in the programming part each and every part here. After completion of this, the last step is available. What is that last step? No, sixth step. That is what there? Close the resources. Close the resources. What exactly the meaning of closing the resources? No, only one point. In JDBC applications, it is convention to close the resources like JDBC connection, comma statement, and so on at the end of the JDBC application in order to avoid security problem and to utilize memory in an effective way. That's it, guys. In an effective way. In JDBC applications, it is the convention to close the resources like JDBC connections, statements, and so on at the end of the JDBC applications in order to avoid security problems and in order to utilize memory in an effective way. Answer my point here. Just when we open the resources, we have to close them. That is the minimum responsibility for us. Observe carefully so that here what I am telling there, here we have to go for rs.close. What is this rs, sir? Result set. The next one is what there? st.close. What is this st? Statement. Then con.close. What is this con actually? What is this con actually? Connection. But understand one small note here. What is the note I am telling to you? Observe carefully. In JDBC applications, closing connection is sufficient. Why? Because if we close the connection, then automatically all statements and result sets are going to be closed. Result sets will be closed. Understand my point here? In JDBC applications, closing connection is sufficient. Why? Because if we close the connection, then automatically all statements and result sets will be closed. Observe carefully. What is the point I am telling to you now? Not required to close everything. Just con.close is sufficient. Why? Because when we close the connection, automatically statement will be closed. Along with statement, automatically result set is going to be closed. So in JDBC application, only what is required here now? Just only con.close method. Automatically statement will be closed. Automatically result set will be closed. But due to the lack of this awareness only, most of the people are trying to close all the resources now. Got it or not? Result set dot close, statement dot close. Then what next one there? Con dot close. And even if we miss the order now, we are able to get exception. For example, if you close the con dot close first, next one is rs dot close. If you write no, exception will come. Why? Because already connection is closed in the sense result set is already been closed. Again, closing result set in the sense, what is the meaning of it? No, not required to close it. So that's why order is important, but better to close only connection. But one more point I'm telling to you, observe carefully, note. I think you might be guess this point here. Or the point I'm telling there, if we use try with resources, then tell me, what's your topic? If we use try with resources, even in a JDBC basics also we are given this point. If we use try with resources, then it is not required to close any resource explicitly. Automatically JVM will close all the resources which are declared in a try with resources part. Try with resources. Even that connection is also be not required to close. Whatever the resources we declared along with the try with resources, no, automatically all the resources are going to be closed. Don't worry. This concept I will explain there again. Programmatically, I will show that point exactly. Don't think much about it now. But all the things in the first program, I will close all of them. Next program only I will use con.close. Close. Next program I will use what there? Try with resources. Not required to close any of the resources. Automatically, JVM will close all the required resources. Is that got it or not? So totally JDBC steps we completed, sir. JDBC steps we completed. Next one is we have to go for what there? ABP01. Example, we have to go there. How to create a table in the database through JDBC program. That example I'm going to show. First program there, where I'm going to use, initially, I'm going to use Oracle database with the type 1 driver. At least one example I have to see and type 1 driver. Same example I will do with the MySQL database with the type 1 driver. After that, I will not touch type 1 driver. As per the requirement, I will go for it. Then directly I will go for what there? Type 4 driver. Understand clearly? If you are getting any problem with Oracle database, don't feel anything bad about it now. Forget about it. Then directly practice with what their MySQL database. I'll show both the cases here starting mode. But for the sake of our practice, we can do that. Later on, we will check why it is not working with Oracle database. Definitely, we'll think about Oracle database also. But immediate programming point of view, two databases I have given there. Let us work with both the databases. Every application, up to 2 to 3 applications, I will show with both the databases. After that, which database is comfortable for you, we can use that respective database directly. Is that clear or not? Right, sir. That's all for today. Then tomorrow we will start directly application development. But my advice to all of you is what there, before come for tomorrow's class, whatever the steps are given in JDBC program, please thorough with the steps. Try to read that all the steps clearly. Moreover, I need to copy this diagram. Right, sir. Now, this is the total JDBC architecture, the program I given there. Please thorough with this diagram, all of you guys. Then we are able to start our application development effectively. Okay, right. Tomorrow, we'll see the remaining content. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll meet on tomorrow. Don't miss the tomorrow's classes there. Application development is very, very important for us. Thank you. Thanks a lot.